So what I'm going to do right now is I'm going to jump into Reaper here and I'm going to show you an example of a virtual instrument and some of my favorites. Okay, so right now I'm in an empty Reaper session. First thing I'm going to do is create a new track. So I'm going to hit Control T, Command T in a Mac, and I come up with a track. All right, so this is already record armed, this little A that's red. That's what that means. It's record armed, which means that it can accept any kind of audio or MIDI data and it will be able to record that onto that track. If I were to press these keys on my keyboard right now, you can see that I have my preferences set up correctly. So Reaper can actually see the notes that are coming off of my keyboard as I press the keys. If there's nothing playing right now because there's no instruments loaded. So what I need to do is load a virtual instrument, and this is how to do it. First thing I'm gonna do is I'm gonna go up here to this effects menu. Now, Logic and Ableton have all different versions of doing this. It's essentially the same process though. So I'm gonna hit this effects button here. So as you can see, there's a big long list of things in here. These are all the plugins that Reaper has available to it that will actually open in the program. This ranges from instruments themselves, synthesizers, to effects, to equalizers, to anything that you're gonna be able to use in Reaper is all listed in this one document. Luckily, you can filter on the left-hand side here and kind of cut it down a little bit, but even easier is you can search. But before we search for the instrument we're gonna use, I'll explain to you what a VST is. The VST is an acronym you're gonna see a lot, and technically it means Virtual Studio Technology, which just means that it's a virtual instrument. And you're gonna look through here, you're gonna see VST, you're gonna see VSTi, you're gonna see VST3. They're all the same thing, just slightly different formats. Some are more efficient than others. Others are just a difference in type. So what we're gonna look for, instead of actually filtering on the side here through type or by company, we're gonna go and just hit all plugins at the top here, and we're gonna type in the plugin that I use the most, the virtual instrument that I use the most, which is kind of a container for other virtual instruments called Complete Control. So essentially what Complete Control is a shell program that houses anything that's compatible with what's called the NKS standard, which is Native Instruments format. I have a lot of things in here. This keyboard is actually a Native Instruments keyboard, so there's some really tight integration going on here. So if I hit a browser key on my keyboard here, the graphical user interface here allows me to browse different instruments. So what I'm gonna do is I'm just gonna scroll through here. And as you can see up on the screen right now, you see like the names are going by of all these different virtual instruments, Vocalese, Gravity, Juno. So these are all from different companies. They're not all from Native Instruments. They're all just based on what I've got in my library. So now I'm gonna load up this virtual instrument called the CS80. It's a virtual instrument by a company called Arturia, who makes great renditions of vintage synthesizers. So this is the CS80 by Yamaha. It's a very old vintage synthesizer. You might have heard it back in the early 80s, Chariots of Fire, Blade Runner, those type of movies all use the CS80 and kind of that signature sound. And so you might recognize some of these sounds with that really nice vintage analog sound. So I'm gonna scroll down here on the right with my little wheel and I'm gonna pick a preset. So preset is just a set of parameters for a certain virtual instrument, and often they have clever little names, and there's sound designers who their entire job is to come up with these presets to kind of give you a starting point in a virtual instrument session. So I'm just going to scroll down here and I'm going to choose 4-note unison, which makes it kind of a thick, fat sound. All right, so if you'll see on the screen here, I've got this loaded up. So I've actually played on one of these. There used to be a place called the Vintage Synthesizer Museum in Emeryville, which was pretty close to San Francisco, which is why I visited there pretty often. I'm in the North Bay now, but back a few years ago, the Vintage Synthesizer was still there. It has actually moved to LA now and expanded, so if you're ever in LA and you really want to play on some vintage synths, I would highly recommend you check that out. The CS80 is a really fun synthesizer to play in real life. It's got this really awesome bar here, which is essentially the pitch bar, but back in the day, this is what they had. This is the very early version of a pitch bar. So if I go ahead and play some notes on this keyboard, you're gonna see that key pressed down on the screen. What I said about latency earlier, my latency is set pretty low. It's set at 128 samples. So that means that the time that it takes for when I press the key and hit a key on a virtual instrument is almost instantaneous. There's no lag. So when I hit that key, it's going to play right away. The great thing about Arturia instruments is they have this great user interface, which is almost identical to the original instrument. The only places it's not identical is the features that they have added. So in real life, this bar actually is a piece of rubber. It's like a rubber strip you can rub your finger along while you're playing, and it's kind of above the keyboard, and you just kind of like, it's really cool. This instrument may look really intimidating the first time you use it. If you're gonna play around with your synthesizer plugins for a while, you're probably gonna be more comfortable kind of going through presets and scrolling through. And this Complete Control piece of software, this plugin, allows you to really get through things quickly. And it's playing a sample of each thing as I go through. There's some really great stuff in here from really amazing sound design. Here's a cool one. So the reason why this is so cool is that this instrument is completely cost prohibitive, and you're not going to get one of these things now. This is a vintage synthesizer. They're astronomically expensive, and even for the very excited enthusiasts, it's the cost of a car, a brand new car. So you probably could get one of these things for like $30,000. And then you would be maintaining it for the rest of your life, because this thing was built in the 1970s. A lot of the parts aren't even available anymore. So this company, Arturia, of course, probably has one of these things that they can play in person. And so they were able to model their virtual instrument off of the real thing. But having one of these things just isn't practical. We live in a really great time now that you can get one of these things and have them in your computer and for pennies on the dollar. So the benefit of having a virtual version of this synthesizer is that you're not going to pay that astronomical expense in order to use it every once in a while. All of you have probably had the experience of purchasing a musical instrument that you never use, and then you just feel guilty and it sits on your shelf and collects dust until you put it on Reverb or eBay or whatever. So you don't have to worry about that with this. This is, the 250 pounds, the constant maintenance, and the brand new car cost equivalent of this device here. You never have to deal with that stuff. If you do want to play one of these things though, I highly recommend checking out the Vintage Synth Museum in LA. They have one of these. You could just play it. It's amazing. So anyway, I'm going to go through a few more instruments. So this is the CS80. So I'm just playing this with my mouse right now. As you can see, this is kind of feeding back here and showing you. So what I'm doing is I'm pressing key, and this virtual instrument that's loaded up in Reaper is playing the sound back to me. Now that is a full, complete feedback loop that's happening there. So that is the musical experience, essentially, in real time. And you're taking your entire studio, astronomically expensive, unattainable vintage synthesizers like the CS80, you got it at your fingertips all the time. So, all right, so I'm gonna go through a few more things in here, and you can kind of see what you can do with virtual instruments. All right, so I'm gonna close this out. I'm gonna make a new track, and I'm gonna load up the same thing again. I'm gonna use, actually I have a shortcut set up, and I'll explain later the benefit of shortcuts and how to set them up. But for now, I'm just gonna hit Alt-F, and you can use this, Option F, or you can set whatever keyboard shortcut you want in Reaper. I set my Alt-F to bring up my effects window. So as you can see, it's already pre-filled with the last thing I filled, which is Complete Control. So I just press the down key a couple times, hit enter, and I'm already ready to go on a new session here. So you're gonna see my keyboard reset. Now I can hit the browser button and just start grabbing another instrument. So now I'm gonna do something that's a little more acoustic. So let's go with this really great virtual instrument called Noir. If you haven't ever heard of Nils Fromm before, I recommend you check him out. He's an amazing instrumentalist. This is actually his piano plugin in his collaboration with Native Instruments that he created a sampled instrument. I'm gonna scroll down here and hit Basic Pure, which is just a simple instrument. So if I hit enter, it's gonna come up with this really cool looking interface on the screen. It's kind of this awesome grand piano you got in the front here. So I'm gonna scroll over in my interface here and turn my volume up a little bit because it's kind of a little soft. So I'm gonna go to 0. So what you've got is a really nice virtual piano. Very different from the vintage kind of like 80s sounding analog synthesizer that the CS80 was. So you've got a really big range of different kinds of instruments you can load, from a simple piano to a symphony orchestra, which I'll show you right now. So I'm gonna hit Alt-F to open up my next track. I'm gonna hit Complete Control, hit enter, and then I'm back in this interface again. I hit the browser button on my keyboard and I go down here and I'm going to scroll down to Spitfire Audio. Spitfire Audio actually has some really great orchestral sounds and virtual instruments. This is actually a free one called BBC Symphony, which is a real general instrument, but it sounds great. So I'm just going to load that up for you real quick. So I'm going to go down here on the right. You're going to hear a preview of all these things going by. So let's just go ahead and load this up. And what you have is this kind of semicircular looking thing. And I'm going to go ahead and play some of these things. Really easy to come. I mean, I just loaded that in 2 seconds, you know? And then as you click on each of these little sections in this virtual instrument, you're going to come up with a different section. See how? So now I can play pretty realistic sounding strings. Kind of amazing, right? This thing was 100% free. So I have the computer, I have Reaper that was $60. And this is free, so it's probably kind of a no-brainer if you're going to use a virtual instrument. It's going to cost you hundreds or thousands of dollars to hire any kind of orchestra to play on your music. And even if you did decide to use, if you had the budget and you decided to use an actual symphony orchestra, then by all means, but at least in this part, you can do the writing and mock up with the actual sounding instruments rather than just guessing what it is in your head. Most people don't have the money or access to be able to use a symphony orchestra. In fact, composers of film music have used virtual instruments since probably the 80s and 90s to do a concept or a demo of the score ahead of time, get it approved by the director, and then print out all of the sheet music and take it to an orchestrator and get them to kind of fill things out. And then perhaps, you know, they'll have a different person that is a conductor that actually conducts the orchestra and this entire orchestra. And it's only for a couple of days or a couple of weeks at the most that they're actually recording these film scores. Orchestras are not cheap. It's lots of people. It's lots of expense. So you've got this all in your computer in this cheap little piece of software with a free virtual instrument. It's amazing. I mean, instant film music. There's just no comparison to what you can do inside of a computer versus in real life for coming up with creative possibilities. All that pressure is off. You don't have a time pressure anymore. You can just sit here all day and make whatever you want. So now that I've loaded up 3 different virtual instruments, a symphony orchestra, a piano, and a synthesizer, let's lay down some tracks. Let's start with the violins. All right, cool. All right, so what I'm going to do is I'm just going to hit record in Reaper, this little red button here, see how it shows up, and you're going to see notes start to appear. Okay, that's just a couple, chords which transformed into multi-instrumental parts because I have a virtual instrument of an orchestra. All right, so I'm going to scroll back and I've got these 3 chords. And if you just kind of click on your timeline here and you hit the space bar, you're going to hear. All right, so now what we're going to do is we're going to go up to the piano VST in the track above the orchestral track, and we're going to lay down a track that complements the one that I just did in the orchestra. All right, I'm going to scroll back a little bit, give myself a little lead time, hit record. Here we go. All right, same chords, different instrument. So now I'm going to go in and edit some of these notes just to play around with it a little bit. I'm going to right click, I'm going to hit open built-in MIDI editor. A lot of different programs have different ways to do this. Usually you can double click it and open it up. But a Reaper's a little weird sometimes. What are you gonna do? So here we go. We've got these 3 chords. Temporarily, I'm gonna mute the orchestral track just so I can focus on my piano track here. So I'm gonna hit solo, actually, and that'll mute all the other tracks in this DAW. It's the same thing as if you were in a recording studio and a mixing board and you hit the solo button, all the other instruments and the whole track are going to mute and you can focus on one single track. All right, so I'm going to hit play here. So a couple of these things I don't really like. First of all is that these notes are a little late. So I'm going to go over here and I'm going to drag this to the side. And just dragging it with my pen here. And then I'm going to play it back again. I'm clicking at the top of the timeline here so I can change my position. And then I hit the space bar to play. Now, it probably wouldn't have mattered as much if I was actually using a sustain pedal. So, in general, you're going to want to use a sustain pedal for a piano part. But I just kind of hacked that and pulled those notes back, so it sounds just as like I was using a sustain pedal anyway. Say I didn't like these notes. Say I messed up the chord, I played it wrong, or I just changed my mind about how it should go. I don't actually have to replay it into the computer every time. I can just move these notes around so you can listen. So that just made a completely different sound as I dragged it on to the next note. So you're looking at this and you're looking at the left side of the screen here. You can see that these notes are changing as I move these notes, these little blocks here. You can see that the notes on the left correspond to what they're doing. So G, G sharp, A. So say I wanted to, for some reason I wanted to use an A here. Then I would play it back. Obviously my timing's still a little bit off, so I'm going to go in here, make sure everything's aligned. So there, I just moved that note and made a completely different chord. So this is really easy to do. Now, what I did to realign those things, I dragged manually. You don't actually have to do that in a MIDI editor. You just hit undo couple times, right, to get it back to its state where they're not really kind of aligned. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to use the control key or the command key on a Mac to select these, multi-select them, so you see they're a little bit darker than those notes, which means they're selected. So I'm going to go up here in the menu and say edit and quantize. You can also, where you can see it says Q here, and that means that the shortcut command Q is also able to do this operation. Quantize just means you want to align them to the grid that you have set up already. Basically, it will push it to be on beat. This is not always something you want to do, but in this case, yeah, I want it to come in on beat 1 of this bar 15 here. As you can see, these 3 notes that I have selected, this one at the top here is kind of halfway in between this little grid line here. And the grid is what type of note or degree of note that you have set up where your quantized notes will snap to. So I'm going to go down here to the bottom left, and it says grid, and it says 132, which means that it's set to 30-second notes. That's not really helpful for what we're trying to do. So I'm going to make that a little simpler. I'm going to go down and make it 1/8 notes. So right now, it'll have reduced those grid lines to much larger degrees, and so now we have 1/8 notes rather than 30-second notes. So when I hit the Q button, it's going to snap all of those notes to the front of the bar. And what it's doing is it's giving me a preview of what it will look like when I do the quantization. So I like that. I'm just going to hit enter and it's going to quantize that. And so when I hit the play button now, it's going to hit right on the front of that bar. And they all play at the same time. Whereas before I quantized, it was kind of this kind of sloppy, kind of messed up thing that I just needed to fix in posts. The benefit of doing this is that you just don't have to replay all the notes again. You don't have to play the part over and over and over to get it right. And if that's what you want to do, fine. You want to get it right, you know, you don't want to use the computer to help you, that's fine. As you start to do this more though, it's going to be more fluid and more comfortable. Whereas if you have one chord in a 2-minute piano part that just doesn't sound right, you can go in here into the MIDI and tweak it. And that's the benefit of virtual instruments, is that you can go into these MIDI notes and edit them after the fact. Same goes for if one of these notes was much louder than the other one. So I'm going to go through ahead and quantize this again just by hitting the Q button on my keyboard. And it's going to do the same thing, hit enter, commit. So it'll line those notes against the 15 bar again. And say, you know, one of these notes is really kind of buried in the chord there. I didn't really hear that fully. Maybe I didn't come down all 3 notes. And so it was a little bit too quiet. So let me grab one of these down here. So down here you see these 3 little lines with kind of a dot on top of them. These are your velocity for each of these notes. So if you select one note, you're going to see which one is being selected in the velocity as well. So that's this note. The block is the note, but the section down here represents the velocity. So this top note is an A above the rest of the chord, and its velocity is real low. So what you're going to want to do to get it louder is to go down here, see where it's yellow and selected. You're going to drag it up, and as you drag it up, Reaper has this kind of handy color indication, and it turns red as it gets higher. Now it probably doesn't, you probably don't want it all the way at the top because that's going to be really loud. Maybe you do, maybe that's your style that you want, but you don't have to do that. So maybe we'll just kind of get it around the same place where it was before. So even with the quantization, even with the moving notes around, you can still maintain a human feel inside of the computer. You don't have to quantize every single note. It's only here and there to make the kind of musical performance a little bit more what you were going for without having to replay the entire part. If you can hear this, it sounds pretty good as far as a piano part. It doesn't sound fake. It sounds absolutely real. Now, if you were to rent out a studio and have a large grand piano that was mic'd up correctly and engineered correctly, you might be able to get this down just as easily and not have to worry about it working in a computer. But I just laid that down in 3 seconds, and I found a little bit of an alignment issue. It took 2 seconds to fix that. So rather than driving to a recording studio and talking to an engineer about having to do this and paying them $600 day rate, I can just go in here and make a piano part on top of a symphony orchestra that I didn't have to hire. Now that we have 2 instrument parts down, we have our virtual orchestra, the string section, and our piano playing the same chords. We're gonna go and add some synthesizers, because why not? I'm gonna first, though, remind you that we're in solo mode. These little yellow icons all up and down the left side of this track here is showing you that it's still in solo mode. So if you're wondering why you can't hear your other tracks, it's because you have your piano soloed out. So let's undo that. So now I can play and I'll hear all my stuff. Obviously, still not aligned correctly, but we're gonna move on. We're gonna go up here to our CS80. Pretty cool. All right, let's see how this blends with all their other parts. That's good. We're gonna hit the play using the space bar. And I can't really hear that, so I'm gonna go up an octave. So let's go ahead and throw this instrument part in here. I'm gonna hit the record button. So now I have 3 virtual instruments layered up. So let's hit the stop button and play that back. So that last note is kind of losing it. It's kind of getting buried in the rest of the orchestration. So let's move it up. You You can hear that in real time. You can hear the note changing and what it sounds like. All right, let's go. There you have it. So that's 3 different instruments I loaded up and fairly quickly was able to orchestrate some little tiny, maybe tiny cue and the worst movie you've ever seen, but just by loading up 3 different virtual instrument tracks. I got an orchestra in there, I got a piano in there, a grand piano, sounds amazing, and I've got this kick-ass virtual synthesizer, the CS80 from Yamaha from 1970 something. I've got all of these in this scene. It took me, you know, if I was just doing it by myself without explaining it, it'll probably take about 3 minutes to make something like this. So you can kind of see where the possibilities of virtual instruments are getting you and the flexibility of having all these instruments at your fingertips for minimal cost.